thank you again for joining us today. This is our July Community of Practice meeting hosted by Refugee Education Australia. As I said at the beginning, but I'll repeat, I'm meeting from the unceded lands of the Awabakal people. I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. This always was and always will be Aboriginal land. And I invite you to recognise the land that you're meeting on in the chat. We're going to hear from the wonderful Kate Gilpin today. Kate's going to tell us all about welcoming universities, which is a really exciting new carrot, hopefully not a stick, for universities to be able to think really carefully about the welcome that they're providing to all sorts of students. Refugee Education Australia, or RESIG as we were at the beginning, have been on the advisory group for the Welcoming Universities Standard for a long time. We've had lots of discussions in that group about what counts as welcome and who can be welcomed and who can give a welcome. And, there's lots of complexity to the question of welcome. But happy to say that the Welcome University Standard is out, and I think Kate's going to give us a bit of an update on how that's tracking in terms of universities going for accreditation. Of course, we don't want this to just be about accreditation. That's not what the Welcoming Universities Standard is about. And similarly, this webinar today is not telling you what to do. It's an opportunity to hear from Kate about the great work that Welcoming Australia and Welcoming Universities have been doing, and to think carefully about what examples we might be able to discuss, what examples you might be able to come up with when you or your university goes for Welcoming University accreditation. Is accreditation even the right word, Kate?
Yep, that's correct. Yeah, that's right. Yep.
So I'm going to very briefly get us going and introduce what we're up to. Then I'll introduce Kate, and Kate's going to take up most of the time. But before we do that, I do want to share some very exciting RIA news, which is that Refugee Education Australia is, as of last week, but backdated to the 24th of October, a public benevolent institution. So we have charity status, which is very, very exciting. And means that we automatically get DGR, donatable gift recipient status. And so watch this space for more exciting news about what RIA is about to do. And another bit of exciting news, which is more for me, is that I will be stepping in as the founding CEO of RIA as of pretty much last Tuesday. And so you, your university, your colleagues, your students will be hearing a lot more from us as we track into the future. If you've got any questions about that, please let me know. Just a couple of dates before we turn to Kate. So you hopefully you know that we have our National Scholarships Expo happening on the 23rd of July. We've invited all of the universities across the country that we know of that are offering asylum seeker scholarships in particular, but also, stipends and bursaries to refugee students or other students who meet forced migration criteria. We've also been reaching out to our networks, but we'd love a bit of help with that. So I'll be sending something around to this group that you could forward on either internally within your institution or to community organisations or student groups that you're aware of. We've hit up all the usual suspects, but there is always a need to do better place-based mapping of who's working with whom to support refugees to access higher education, but that's not just our only focus. It will be the focus for the 23rd of July. And then we're starting some student-focused events. We've just set up a RIA Instagram page to communicate better with students. It's definitely not my wheelhouse. I'm finding it quite hard. But we have got 3 workshops coming up for students so that they can be supported a bit better to be competitive in scholarship applications, and there's more information coming out about that presently. But let me turn over and introduce the wonderful Kate Gilpin, who is our star presenter today. Kate works for Welcoming Australia as the National Coordinator of Welcoming Universities. If you don't know about Welcoming Australia, I'll share a link in the chat when Kate gets started. They do all sorts of excellent things, including welcoming clubs and welcoming cities, and just recently, and Kate can correct me if I'm wrong on this, welcoming work or welcoming workplaces. I think it's welcoming work. But Kate is also the Queensland Coordinator of Welcoming Cities and an excellent sunglass wearer. I think we can all agree from that brilliant photo that I fished from her website. So let me stop sharing and I will hand over the floor to Kate. We will be taking questions, so if you want to pop them in the chat, I can keep an eye on those and curate them. Kate, you can run this session as you like. If you want to keep going and then wait for questions or take them as you see them, that's up to you. Thank you.
Sorry, I was just having a bit of trouble with my mute button. That photo is hilarious. That was from my mum's 70th birthday. So I've got a bit of glamour on. I'm not looking like that today. Lovely to see you all. Thank you so much for having me. I am a little bit technologically unsavvy, so I will share my screen now. But if there's a problem, I'm so sorry. It's just me finding my way. And I'm very bad at seeing questions in the chat. So please, put up your hand with the function that allows you to do that, or yell out or something, because I won't be intentionally ignoring you. I won't see it. I'm sorry. I get in the flow and I forget what I'm doing. It's so lovely to be with you all today. Thank you so much. Sally and I have been talking about this for a little while, but unfortunately, we've just been missing each other lately. My youngest son had his tonsils out 2 weeks ago, and I can't believe that it actually takes full weeks for them to heal from that. So I've been off work for a little bit looking after him and not as onto it as I'd like to be. So I'm sorry if I'm a little bit fumbly today, but always feel free to reach out to me and ask other questions if I miss things that you'd like to know about with welcoming universities. So the brief that Sally gave me was about telling and selling the story of refugee welcome in universities. And I really want to talk a bit about why it's so important to tell the stories of welcoming work in our universities and the impact that can have. I'll just flip forward to my next slide. So I'll begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the lands that I'm on and that we're all on today. So I live in Meanjin or Brisbane, and I'm on the lands of the Turrbal and Yagara people, and I pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people here today. As you know, it's NAIDOC week, and I really want to say how lucky and grateful I am to live and work and raise my family on this beautiful country that has been cared for thousands of years and is unceded, and it always was and always will be Aboriginal land. So I wanted to kind of establish a little bit about what Welcoming Australia is. First, for those of you who don't know, so this is our kind of value statement or mission statement. Welcoming Australia exists to cultivate a culture of welcome and create a future where people of all backgrounds have equal opportunity to belong, contribute and thrive. So it's a big mission that we have. And for the, sorry, like I said, for those who don't know, our roots as an organisation are actually in the space of working with communities of refugees and people seeking asylum. So Welcoming Australia started about 15 years ago in Adelaide, and initially it was very much a grassroots community-led program and initiative. This was the time when community detention was being introduced for people seeking asylum, and there was a lot of fear and backlash in the community in inner city Adelaide, actually, where people were going to be housed and placed in that community, settled in that community. And so the founder and the people who initially started working on this welcoming work developed a kind of counter narrative to that fear-based conversation, to say to the people seeking asylum, you are welcome here and you're welcome in this community, but also to bring on board the established community who were fearful and scared, to kind of show that we're all humans and we all want the same things, and we all want to live in a safe community, and we want good schools for our kids and familiar food and friendships and all of those kinds of basic human needs. And so they did things like organising community dinners, community welcome walks. They partnered with people like the Wiggles to talk about why welcoming and inclusion is so important. And that was kind of the roots of Welcoming Australia. And over time, it evolved. And so about 12 years ago, Welcoming Cities was developed. That's the first initiative that was created. And that was with a little bit of funding through the Scanlon Foundation, which, if you're not aware of, is an organisation or a philanthropic organisation funded by Peter Scanlon, who has a big focus on social cohesion in his work, in his philanthropy, and social cohesion in that true sense of, you know, building societies or communities where people can have differing opinions and differing values and things, but also live in collaboration and connection with one another. And so that was the initial work, was working with councils, understanding that council is the tier of government where which has the most impact on new arrival communities and on creating welcoming and inclusion on a local level, but are often some of the most under-resourced tiers of government in terms of providing that support. So we work with councils and continue to work with councils to build that capacity of them to do welcoming well. And that is working with both the new arrival communities, but also fundamentally working with those established communities to build that culture of welcome and inclusion, for in that kind of intercultural way. So so we have a distinct way of working, which I was a bit unsure about when I started with the organisation, but now I completely love and am on board with. And we have a number of initiatives that sit under the Welcoming Australia banner. So Welcoming Cities, which I mentioned, Welcoming Clubs, which is our work with sporting and recreational clubs and codes, and then Welcoming Workplaces, which Sally mentioned, which is our newest initiative, which is working with big employers, often big employers in the regions that need to attract and retain staff, but don't have a lot of the social and cultural infrastructure, supports, inclusion principles to make that viable. But Welcoming Universities and all our initiatives work in this fundamental way of building knowledge sharing. So creating communities of practice, building a network, sharing across universities and within universities. As I'm sure you know, universities can be very siloed institutions internally and externally. So building that ability to collaborate and connect internally and externally. We do a lot of partnership development. So that is working with local government, connecting local government with universities or state government, or it might be, you know, organisations or initiatives like Study Queensland or Study Cairns or Study Melbourne, you know, partnering them with universities, or working with community organisations, connecting with diaspora communities, connecting with settlement agencies, whole range of those kinds of things in that space. Then we do what we call Celebrating Success, which I'll talk a little bit more about today, because that's where the storytelling component or storytelling piece comes into play. And then we have standards and accreditation, and that's our Welcoming University Standard, which I can, you know, send you a digital copy of today. But that is, it's not a requirement at all for our universities to become accredited members of Welcoming Universities, but it can be used as a resource to look at what best practice looks like when we're creating welcoming for students and staff from racialised backgrounds, new arrival community members, marginalised communities. So I will move on to, the other thing we do that I just wanted to highlight is that there's a lot of things that sit around these core areas of work. So we do training and development, specific project support, sector commentary and sector development, but fundamentally it all sits back under those four umbrellas of knowledge sharing, partnership development, and celebrating success, and then standards and accreditation. Welcoming Universities was created about 3 years ago almost. I've been with the organisation 2.5 years. And Welcoming Universities was created because we were contacted by people working in the university sector saying, we need this kind of welcoming work within this space. We need universities to become more welcoming, inclusive, and places of belonging for all, including staff and students from racialised backgrounds and refugee, asylum seeking, and migrant backgrounds. So we're not part of a university ourselves, although I worked in universities for a very long time. Um, and and that sitting separate to universities gives us quite a helpful vantage point because we can see in, but we really try and work alongside institutions to build resources, deliver training, support strategic development, create these communities of practice, and then provide that national standard for benchmarking progress within universities on inclusion, welcoming inclusion and belonging. Our role is to champion what's working and identify what's needed. So as Sally said, we hope to be a carrot. Sometimes I think we have stick-like tendencies, but we really want to focus on what's working well, but also identify what's needed and help tell the story of what real, tangible, welcoming, inclusion and belonging looks like in universities. So I'm going to flip over to the next slide. Sorry. So one of the key ways we do this is through our annual Stories of Welcome publication. So these are examples of some of those publications over the last few years. And we frame this in a particular way at Welcoming Australia. We talk about this as our work in celebrating success, which was mentioned in that outline of the way we work before. Initially, I was like, oh, this is all a bit touchy-feely. How does this work? What does this look like? But I've now seen that this storytelling work is really tangible and really essential to what we do. So celebrating success and telling stories of success in welcoming inclusion and belonging really helps us show what works, how it works, why it works, but also where problems were in the past and how things were changed to be more successful in terms of building that welcoming inclusion belonging. It also helps us answer questions from the systems or communities that we work with, so councils, universities, sporting clubs, etc. When they say, I don't know how to start this, and will this actually work? And it also speaks to the idea of you can't be what you can't see. So really showing this was the starting point and this is where we got to, and here's a story of how that happened. So each year we collect and share stories from councils, communities, sporting clubs, workplaces and universities that are doing welcoming work, but also stories that reflect that broader work that can happen around welcoming inclusion and belonging. And they're on a continuum. So they can be really small stories or they can be bigger stories. One brilliant story that always is really interesting for people is some work that we did with Balonne Shire Council. Now, Balonne is, a very small region in Western Queensland, and they desperately needed to attract an engineer to work with them in council, and they were having real trouble getting staff. So somebody agreed to come and work with them. He was a South Asian man, recent migrant with an engineering qualification, but he said he would only stay for 6 months. He went out there, worked with council. They wanted to keep him. They said to him at the end of that time, after working with us, why won't you stay? And he said, I can't stay because I cannot access halal meat in this part of the world. I don't have access to transport and a car, so I can't build a life here if I can't access food that is culturally safe, familiar, and appropriate for me in this region. So then the solution was that he was given access to a council car, and normally council cars weren't allowed to leave the confines of that LGA, and he was given access to use a council car outside of the LGA to go to the next shire over, which is Merway Shire, which had a halal butchery so he could access appropriate meat. Now, that is a very, very small, simple, localized example, but had a massive impact on that region and that community, and also that person feeling welcomed and like he mattered, and that they would make a changed council policy to include him in that place. Some of the other stories are bigger stories about inclusive recruitment policies developed by councils, or the creation of big community festivals and making sure that different community stories were told as part of those festivals, or the development of a trauma-informed coaching program for soccer in a full state area. Or one good example in the university space is in this year's Stories of Welcome, we told the story of the Diversity Festival that is held at UNSW each year. So they're big and small, but they are all stories about systems and how they can change to be more welcoming. So higher education systems, local government systems, sporting organisation systems, doing some of this small and some of this bigger work to welcome, include, and create belonging. So this is what we talk about with celebrating success. This is what success can look like, very small things or very big things. And I want to take a moment to talk a little bit about how we approach this storytelling, because we're really intentional about it at Welcoming Australia. We don't tell people stories for them. We never ask people to share trauma. If someone chooses to share their experience, we make sure it's on their terms with full consent and with as much or as little detail as they feel comfortable with. For many, especially those with lived experience of displacement, the act of telling their story can be exhausting, re-traumatizing, or simply not something they want to do. And that's completely valid. So instead, we reflect on individuals within the context of systems, or communities within the context of systems. So we might talk about a student cohort, a support program, or a partnership, but we're always asking, what is the bigger picture? How is this system or this institution changing the way it works to include diverse people within that place? And how can we share that story? So this approach is always guided by our belief that ethical storytelling centres the subject and not the institution. And when I say that, I mean it's about how a program or initiative has impact, not about how great we are because we did this. It upholds the dignity, agency, and consent. It avoids trauma mining, hero narratives, or saviour stories, and it reflects the complexity of real human experiences, not just the pain and not just the success, the complexity of that story. I'll share a piece in the chat in a minute by Samar Shada, who created the Unbound Stories initiative, and she wrote a piece for City of Sydney for Refugee Week, and she wrote in it, "When we reduce refugee stories to horror or heroism, we miss the chance to see people in their full humanity. But we're also not telling a story we're entitled to tell." So the institution can tell the story of what they did to support refugee students to come and study at their university, but not the story of the student or the students. That student may well wish to tell their story, and the university can provide the platform and the support for them to do that. But it's not the university story. The story they can tell is how they do welcoming and why they do welcoming and what inclusion means to them and why they want to do this work of welcoming, inclusion, and belonging. And this, I believe, or we believe as an organisation, this is more impactful too, because it's showing a big institution engaging with complexity. It's showing what their values are, how they believe in education for all, but they still understand that there's complexity within an organisation that needs to sustain itself. It's not pretending that this is saving everyone. It's showing that this is a system changing to be more welcoming and inclusive, and really embedding those principles in what they do. And that really captures our approach. Stories are part of and a key way to capturing the impact of welcoming work, and they show in big and small ways why it's so important. I'm just going to flip forward and tell you a little bit about how this approach and this work aligns with our Welcoming University Standard. So, our Welcoming University Standard is a national framework that supports universities to assess and improve how welcoming and inclusive they are across a range of areas. So, we have categories. So that's leadership, anti-racism, social and cultural inclusion, teaching, learning and research, and places and spaces. And then under each category, the principles associated with that category, which you can see in the image there. Then we have the criteria that sit under each of those categories and indicators that universities can produce examples that they are meeting those indicators. So we encourage universities not to use the standard as a checklist, but as a lens to help map where they are and where they want to go and how they might get there. So we do standards in all of our different initiatives at Welcoming Australia, and it's a very comprehensive process. So I think we took about 2 years in drafting and developing the Welcoming University Standard, seeking feedback regularly from our advisory committee, then from the wider sector throughout that process. And I think our standards should be seen as both the sum of its parts and as a whole document. So there are things that can be pulled out specifically that relate to the needs of certain cohorts. For example, when we're talking about the experiences of refugee and forcibly displaced students, there is specific references to the needs of cohorts within those cohorts within the standard. So indicator 2.34 outlines that the standard indicator requires that the university advocates for and supports forcibly displaced people seeking access to higher educational opportunities. And indicator 3.13 outlines that the university builds the capacity of teaching staff, including sessional staff, to meet the learning requirements of diverse student groups in the classroom, including forcibly displaced people. But we often emphasize that every part of the standard speaks to this work of creating belonging in a more general way. So that's specific examples that relate to the experiences of forcibly displaced students within universities. But there are other more general indicators as well that are also relevant to those cohorts of students, even though they're not specifically referencing that group. So another couple of examples are 3.3, indicator 3.31 says the university ensures that teaching, pedagogy and learning materials are developed and conducted equitably for diverse student cohorts, including integrating language supports for students from non-English speaking and plurilingual backgrounds. And indicator 2.11 says university ensures that key strategic documents include statements reflecting principles of welcoming, inclusion, and celebrating diversity. So these kinds of indicators and commitments by a university don't refer only to one cohort or one group, but they signal that the institution as a whole is valuing welcoming, inclusion, and belonging for all. And that it's part of that kind of institutional DNA. It's becoming embedded in the way that institution works. The examples that the institution then uses to show how they are doing this might refer to refugee student cohorts, but they also might not. And that's okay. It's about the way in which the university is working towards a whole of systems change towards being more welcoming and inclusive. So I really think it's important that universities tell their stories of welcoming. If a university is offering access programs, scholarships, mentorships, academic bridging, these are incredible commitments and definitely worth sharing and championing and show how welcoming and inclusion is being acted upon within an institution. but they're not the whole story. They also need to sit within a framework of a university working towards creating cultural awareness, embedding anti-racism principles, ensuring diverse leadership. So it's sitting, one needs to sit within the other, so to speak. I hope that makes sense, but I'm happy to answer more questions about that too, because it's quite hard to kind of explain without specificity. Um, and I think a good example of this is the story of the Multicultural Women's Network at UTS that we wrote again for this year's Stories of Welcome. That is not a refugee specific initiative within the university, but I believe that reading the story of this Multicultural Women's Network, how it was created, why it was created, would absolutely matter to students from refugee backgrounds, and particularly women students from refugee backgrounds, to know that diverse voices are being valued, that multicultural women are being championed within the university, and the university is serious about equity. So it's not a program that is specific to refugee students, but it does have impact on the experiences of refugee students within that university. It tells that wider story about who belongs here and who gets to be seen, heard, and supported. And that aligns with a whole bunch of indicators within the Welcoming University Standard as well. So I wanted to kind of, close with the idea. This is the quote I love that I come back to all the time in the work of welcoming universities. Our goal is to create belonging and ask, does everyone on campus feel valued, connected, and able to be their authentic self? So I'm just going to flip my page. We want to, in our work at welcoming universities, we always want to be, asking what happens when a student walks through the door at a university? How are universities actively creating belonging? And that again might be in big and small ways. It might be about specific cohorts initially, and then move to a more substantive and about systems change overall. We're always asking, do people feel welcome within the university environment? Do people from all backgrounds feel welcome? Do they see themselves reflected in the curriculum? Do they feel safe speaking up in these environments? Do they know where to go to get support? And do they believe this place is designed with them in mind, or being shifted and changed to include them within that space? So I think telling those stories of this work happening, like I said, again, big and small stories of that welcoming work being implemented within an institution is really key. And I think, right now we know that this is more critical than ever. We're hearing lots and lots of conversations about universities and equity and inclusion, and we know that it's really important for our universities to show this work and to share this work widely. And I think that is all I really needed to kind of speak at you about. Now I would be really keen to have a conversation with you all. I'll stop sharing this screen and see if we can have a bit of a discussion about this, or I can clarify anything for you, and go from there.
Terrific. Thanks, Kate, for a really excellent overview. Such exciting and important work that Welcoming Australia is doing in general, but really exciting to see this Welcoming Universities Standard and the work that sits alongside it develop. Does anyone have any burning questions for Kate about any part of the kind of project, the accreditation, the standard? I popped a link to the standard in the chat already, Kate, so hopefully folks. Because if not, I think what we'll do is we'll move into a kind of more workshopy part of the webinar today. Any questions from the floor? Any questions in the chat? Terrific. Okay, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop you into breakout rooms, and I'm going to leave you to choose your break. room. But I've set these four rooms according to the four different parts of the standard, and so I'm hoping that we don't have, everyone in teaching, learning, and research, and no one in leadership, for example. I'm going to invite you to choose which room you think you would like to join, depending on what your role is, or depending on what particular vision you have for what could be a welcoming university. So we can do this one of two ways. I think option one, which is the preferred way, is in your university, in your actual practice, in your daily kind of work and in your strategic planning, how are you working towards, or how would you demonstrate to welcoming universities as part of this process that you are welcoming, you have welcoming leadership, that you have welcoming work happening in the anti-racist space, that you've got welcoming teaching, learning, and research, and that you're creating welcoming places and spaces. You could expand your kind of your lens to beyond the cohort that we're particularly interested in today. But ideally, you'll come back to and at least pay some attention to refugees, asylum seekers, migrants, and other people who might hit that domestic cohort. Now, international students were very much part of the discussion in welcoming universities. And while we know that there are many shared characteristics of people who come to Australia, who migrate to Australia either temporarily or permanently, I think it's useful to focus on domestic students in this discussion because they do, as we all know, they hit the domestic student cohort. They have a slightly different experience. Obviously, not so much in terms of access for people seeking asylum, but once they're in a university, they're generally treated as domestic students. Generally, maybe you can give examples of where that's not the case. So, let's spend a bit of time getting to know each other. So you should now be able to choose your breakout room. Um, and we've got 10 people left in the room. So you might find yourself as a couple. Otherwise, I can pop you in there if you'd rather. And let's spend a little bit of time thinking about either what your institution is doing well or what your institution could do better to create welcome in those particular areas. So thanks for moving yourself into a room. I'll bring you back in about 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes, and we can have a bit more of a discussion then. I'm going to lurk in this main room, so if you've got any questions, let me know. Angela's assistant, you can sit with me. I love it when an AI bot comes to a meeting. Kwong and Anna, can I help you move into a room? Or can I move you into a room? Hi, Kwong. I'm going to... Okay, so what ideas did we come up with? Like, what is on the kind of possible list and what is on the aspiration list? Let's come to you first. We didn't have anyone, interestingly, no one went into the anti-racism room. So I guess all of this is really underpinned by anti-racism. It doesn't need to be a separate piece. Let's go to leadership first then. Who's going to just kind of give us a brief update on the discussion you had in the leadership group? What would make, it's such a huge thorny question. What would make welcoming leadership? I actually think this is at the heart of the issue because if we've got welcoming leaders, and we've known this in ReSig and now RIA for a long time, when you find the right senior exec who believes in what you're doing, things move quickly. So who was in group one? I know Kate was in room one talking about leadership. Who else was with you, Kate?
You go, Asma.
Asma and John. One of you
Okay.
speak. I've spoken enough
Okay.
today.
Asma, I think Asma has turned a camera on. Asma, always delightful to see you.
Oh, it's lovely to you all here too. We had such a great discussion in that room. Oh my gosh, it was so inspiring to hear from John and then also Kats and their journey throughout this process. We were sharing more of our experience than answering questions. But I can share that what we have learned, and I've personally learned today, is the fact that by sharing our experience, we can do more, we can do better. And by giving opportunity to lived in experience members in our community, we can hear more about their experience well. So if you come across with any opportunity, share that with the students because that actually make the empowerment more impactful within the team. Uh, Sally, these are the things that I've learned more that I
Um,
can share.
Asma, in your discussion, were you talking about sharing experience with leaders, with senior executive, with managers? Like,
Absolutely, especially when it comes to the institutions, we have got a great way and opportunity to share of our achievement. It's not about putting others down, but then empowering and highlighting the gap that we can actually fill in by it could be starting with the number of scholarships that we can offer, sharing our success and then also the feedback that we have from individuals and then how we overcome that to bring that change. It's very powerful that we can improve on. So overall, holistically, by sharing our success and then also our unsuccessful stories, we can be better.
yeah, okay, I love this idea of sharing, but what we know about senior exec, I'll just be provocative for a second, and forgive me if there are any senior exec members here who want to challenge me, very happy, let's go. But senior exec generally are difficult to speak to. They're kind of protected by layers and layers of hierarchy. So just any suggestions from the group about what is I agree, Asma. Every single time we do a student panel, it is the most impactful thing that happens at any event. It's great to share, I think, both success and examples of challenge. But
Mm.
how do we do that in a way that creates more welcome at the leadership level, I guess is a question.
Sorry,
John, would you
we
like to
got
go?
sorry, Asma, to interject. We have a we sort of have a formula for this, and it's to not so much call out all the time, but to softly remind, and I mean sometimes to call out, but also to use the universities against each other. So to use cross-pollinate this, use this group, get the best practice, and say, look, Monash is doing that. This is what we're not doing, and
I agree, John.
this is what our students are not gaining, give specific examples of how our students are feeling, what's the problem, how another university is doing it, and what the outcomes for those universities, thriving students, thriving campus, scholarships, examples.
Mhm.
That's the formula, I think, that we've come up with how to speak to management.
Okay, excellent. I love this idea of leveraging the competition. So softly reminding, John, that's
They're,
definitely going to be in my LinkedIn post.
they're all concerned about their reputations and how they're perceived in the community
Yeah.
and
That's exactly right.
between one another. Yeah.
That's also what I want to say is what's in it for me? That's the question they may ask. What's in it for a short term that they serve in that role, but that also impacting the university? You always have to say, well, that's to bring a great impact for your university. But hidden behind that is what is in it for myself, you know?
It's a good prompt. I mean, it's good for us to remember that that's a driving question at the leadership level. Thank you, room one, great reflections. Room three was teaching, learning, and research. So I know that Ramzia and Tim and Schnez, I think she's dropped off, were in that room. Ramzia and Tim, not to put you on the spot, but to put you on the spot, what was the discussion that you had? Hi, Ramzia, always lovely.
Hello, Tim, the floor is yours.
Well played, Ramzia.
No, just because Tim is doing a PhD studies, we need to give an opportunity to students to showcase their learning and teaching.
Very good. So, Tim, no pressure, but it's on you.
I guess that's a nice lead into one of the things that we discussed, and that was really student-centered approaches to both teaching and research. I did kind of talk about my own PhD research where students are recognized as co-researchers and co-designers with the idea being that that kind of acknowledges that they are the experts of their own experience. And I guess we also talked about, students know what's best for them. And so it's about, when you're developing something at your university for students, it's about including them in those discussions as well. What else did we talk about? We also were discussing ideas around, development of equity frameworks and inclusion of students in those, while also recognizing intersectionality. And I think Ramsey discussed some ideas around, case management approaches as well. So,
Yeah.
that was a big discussion as well. And then I think, Ramsey also talked about within the university, talking with unit coordinators and, discussing ideas around students might need some additional support and kind of working with them on how best to do that. So there were some little nuanced ideas around that as well. I don't know whether you want to add to that, Ramsey.
Now you captured well. So it's a holistic approach to support and how it looks like. So it is again that intersectionality in mind. Students might be refugees, but they might be with disabilities. They come with complex trauma. They come from non-English speaking background. They are on low income. Sometimes they can't travel for work to different places because their visa doesn't allow it, and visa regulations change almost daily. So you need to keep an eye on those things. So for that, you need to have a holistic approach to how to support them to make sure that we retain them at university. It will never be perfect, but if you at least achieve to do 60% of that and put it in place, you're guaranteed that your students will be at university. And again, because many of them consider it international students, you need to make sure that you agree with the university that they can allow them to do part-time studies. And that allows them only to work and feel the sense of belonging that they're contributing to society and also contributing towards the family well-being. And at the same time, they are studying. So we have evidence that it has been working for our students as such.
Perfect. Well, I think we need to know more of that evidence when it comes to people seeking asylum, Ramsey. I think we know less about temporary refugees with temporary protection or people seeking asylum than we know about any other cohort in higher ed, because we don't collect, decent kind of systematic data and well articulated. We QUT have been doing excellent work in this space. Also, it's great to see you back. Not that you ever went away, Ramsey. Okay, let's go to our final group. So that was the folks in the place and space. Am I right? Place and space? Yes, places and spaces group. Who's going to speak on behalf of group 4? I think maybe from memory, Chris and Najma were in that group, and maybe Kwong as well.
Maybe Kwong to take the lead.
Thanks, Chris. Anyone else? Any contributions about what makes welcoming places or spaces? Any observations from those of us who were not in the room for that group? What are the kinds of things that are effective creating welcoming spaces for students? I mean, obviously some obvious items would be prayer rooms, would be spaces for, I think in the general mix, Kate, you could jump in as well, like be things like sensory rooms or quiet rooms for people who might have sensory processing needs. Anything else, Kate, from that comes to mind from places and spaces?
Let me just have a look at my little booklet here so I can remind myself. So I think, all those things like accessible and culturally safe spaces, and that can be online too. Sometimes online learning environments can be quite, culturally unsafe for a lot of people to access. Then there's also things about like cultural inclusion in procurement in procurement measures within the university too. So ensuring that that diversity is represented in the actual design and development of spaces and places within a university. Then we've also got things like training for staff so that they can make online and in-person spaces culturally safe. So it's about the way we are in places and spaces, not just the physical environment. And then including First Nations and culturally diverse. I use that term loosely just as a descriptor. I'm sorry, it's an appalling term. Are included in art gallery spaces, in programming of arts and cultural programming within the university, and that there is the celebration and showcasing of that within universities as well. So we've included that within the places and spaces component of the standard too. Yeah.
Terrific. Thanks, Kate. I think what we really want to see, and maybe this is a follow-on from this first webinar, is some of those worked examples of, well, what are universities saying? Look, are those kind of diverse, welcoming places and spaces? Love the inclusion of procurement, have a strong memory. We'll be careful about saying this in a recorded forum, but have a strong memory of a procurement disaster at one university I once worked at. You can look at my resume and work out which one, who employed a particular organisation involved in offshore detention to do some on-campus work. Really didn't work out well for that university. Was a pretty huge point of debate. And obviously we see a lot of issues at the moment, protests around procurement with companies that have a footprint in some of the areas of conflict. I'm going to just move my way around that one without talking about it in any triggering or meaningful way. Sorry, everybody. Well, I think perhaps the next thing to do, and other than to say thank you, is just, does anyone have any questions? Now you've had that conversation, any questions for Kate or any observations that Kate can take back to welcoming universities, or anything that RIA can contribute in the future to advisory group meetings for the standard and the work around welcoming universities?
If I may,
please. Thank you.
With the welcoming universities, Kate, just a question for you. I feel like most universities have already embedded all of the principles of inclusion and belonging as part of their blueprints. And we are trying to achieve, I guess, we are trying to mainstream it in a way that it's part of the culture here. And everything is part of the culture. Wherever a student comes, that pays us to deliver the knowledge that we have a space and place for them. So I'm not sure about your accreditation, like what purpose will it serve if universities should already do their job without being accredited for something that they should be doing in any way as part of their blueprint. So NMDA, the Multicultural Development Association of Multicultural Australia, is already doing a lot of work that you seems to be doing as well. But what I liked about your program is that you're connecting people to businesses. I guess that's something you should take credit for, because that's where the gap is. So if you can take credit for and work on that, that would be fantastic. But the accreditation, I'm just sort of questioning it at this point. I might read a bit more and might come to say, oh, it makes sense. But at this point, I'm like, well, why don't we put pressure on our universities to do things that are already written in legislations, that are already in our policies and our blueprints? Let's work with those ones and to make sure that it happens.
I might just paraphrase that into a short and spicy provocation, Kate. And if I've understood correctly, the question here is, and maybe we just take it on notice and we think about how to kind of come back, is why do we need accreditation in the first place? Like, it's already there in the legislation. Except, Ramsey, we know that universities don't, right? So we know that they don't. So, but Kate.
We try, right? We try. It is in our blueprints that we need to create an inclusive and diverse and equitable environment, learning and teaching environment, as well as workplaces, right? And we yet know that things happen, which is unavoidable. It's going to happen. Life is not perfect. but we can just put to say we already have it on our blueprints. Let's put pressure as people working with students to make that happen. Like, I don't need Welcoming Australia to come and say, here's the things, and I need a credit for that one. Why don't you do it? Why haven't you done that? We already respond to TEXA in many things. That's why we continue to be educational institution. And a few other, members of parliament, we are part of WGEA, we are part of this and that, and learning and teaching and everything else. So there is already a lot in place. What purpose will the Welcoming Australia's accreditation serve at this point, I guess?
Well, I don't know if I agree with the premise of your point, because I don't think universities have this ingrained in their blueprint generally. Maybe some, I know that some do, and some are doing really positive work in this space, but I wouldn't actually agree with the idea that that this is embedded across the institution. I think most universities have a policy around diversity, equity, and inclusion, but how that's embedded is pretty varied across different institutions. It's also, for me, in our work, we see the complexity of definitions of equity and what is included within that. It's very limited. It's very, TEXA requires certain equity principles for certain cohorts of students, but not all students, and not equity-like groups as Access calls them in some of their research. And there's not a lot of intersectionality in that approach that is embedded through TEXA. So I don't actually align with the idea that universities are doing this already or intending to do this. And I think, I don't know what that is. But I also think, sorry, do you need me?
Pom, do you know that you're sharing your screen?
I don't know what happened. Maybe you knocked something, Kwong.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Next one.
Sorry about that.
That's all right. And then the other piece is, I think, the reason that we exist as an organisation is because we don't see this work being done by other organisations. Multicultural Australia is a fantastic organisation, but their focus is primarily on settlement services and then multicultural community development engagement. That's not what we do. We work across both new arrival communities, as we call them, or racialised and diverse communities, and the dominant culture within Australia. So that's where the focus of our work is. And we've taken the requirements of the different authorities with universities and brought them into the one document through the Welcoming Universities Accreditation Framework. So that's why we developed that, and that's our intention with that. Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Ramsey. I think this is, and thanks for responding, Kate, and providing such a robust rebuttal. I think it's important that we have these conversations. There are questions about there being too much compliance activity, right? If it becomes a tick and flick exercise, it's not in the way that it was originally intended. And that's something that we discussed a lot in discussions when we were putting together when Welcoming Universities were putting together the standard, and the advisory board was providing commentary. And absolutely take on Sue's point, and I think Kate did self-correct in the moment.
Yes.
Is a hyper problematic.
Please know that I use the term culturally diverse, and as I said before, it's a problematic term. I'm using it in inverted commas as just a general term to try and talk about the space that we're working in, but it's not it is a very problematic term, and it's not an appropriate term. It's just I know Sally prefers calm, and then some people I work with don't like that term, and they don't like the idea of being named as marginalised when they don't identify as marginalised. So it's a very complex space to talk about. Yeah. It's something we actually write a lot about in the beginning of the standard, why we use the terminology we use and how complex it is to use terminology in this space. Yeah.
So listen, I'm just going to finish up now. Thank you so much to Kate, and thank you for everyone for your contributions. There's been a little discussion about how to follow on, and Kate, I suspect at some point in perhaps towards the end of the year we might do a part 2 and think about, picking up that really good question about, the questions about, how to move this beyond a tick and flick accreditation activity, or what kind of wording is appropriate. There's lots of different variations, and they all have an issue, right? I'm going to, and thank you, Kate, for bringing the welcoming generosity to this RIA webinar. Let me just share my screen briefly and tell you that our next session from RIA is on the 6th of August. This is after the expo. So just to remind everyone that we have our scholarships expo on the 23rd of July. We're busy in the background making sure that both universities and potential students will be in the mix. But our next kind of community of practice event will be on the 6th of August, where Shaheen White, brilliant Shaheen from Refugee Council, is going to join us and give us a kind of overview of the different entitlements according to visas. This was actually what was requested very strongly at the end of our previous webinar, when Katie from Western Sydney presented on their trauma-informed scholarships process and application. So please do join us. You should have received an email about this. You'll see us, we're all over LinkedIn. We're about to be all over Instagram. It's making me a bit sick. I don't love the social media, but it is definitely part of the job. So we hope we'll see you on the 6th. We will send a short survey to you and to the broader group to see what kind of things you want next. This is very much in our wheelhouse, and it is the kind of, it's very important to Refugee Education Australia. It's not our only public goal. You might recall from the last time that we've got 6 public goals, but for people seeking asylum in particular, because they are the most marginalised group in a student group in Australian higher education, very, very, very difficult to identify. Some people do the support well, some don't do the support at all. So there are still universities in Australia who don't provide any fee waiver scholarships for people seeking asylum. So this remains a really strong focus of our work, but it's not all we do. We'll be building in some capacity building activities, and hope that you'll share the word. It really comes down to the network, doesn't it, as always? So hopefully we'll see you on the 6th of August. We'll be in your inboxes with a very brief survey request for you to help us work out our programming for the rest of this year and beyond. We'll have at least one more webinar before the end of the year, probably around October, but we can organise these kinds of lunch and learn sessions when and as needed. Just requires some ideas.